Welcome to our session again, and we've got some exciting speakers today. We've got two speakers. Later on will be Yannick from VMware in EMEA, but a little bit more about him a little bit later. And a very well-known speaker to us, somebody you've seen before on our seminars, in webinars, etc. A gentleman called Arthur Goldstuck, and we're all very familiar with him in the South African context. And Arthur is going to speak today about a little bit about the changes that's happening. And I think we're all a little bit to death with COVID conversations, but the game's not over, and I think businesses are still undergoing a major transition. And Arthur, who watches that space extensively in terms of the transformation, the end-user experience, and as you know, Arthur owns and runs a company called World Wide Worx. So I'd like to introduce Arthur and give Arthur an opportunity to run through his discussion, which is going to be very interesting in terms of how we're changing, how the world is functioning, and I think this temporary what we thought is temporary is not so temporary at the moment. It's going to be a longer term. Perhaps it's the new normal already that we were talking about, and the old way of working is not going to come back. I think the verdict is out, and we need to be agile enough to be able to run our businesses and continue functioning in a manner that serves our customers, our employees, and vice versa. So thank you, Arthur, for joining us and for giving us the opportunity to host you. It's always good to work with you, and I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be chatting with First Technology again. I think this is the fourth or fifth year that I've been sharing my annual perspective of where we are going in the future. I usually call it the shape of the future. Today, we're going to be talking about the new shape of the future, excuse me. And I hope that the storms in Cape Town today aren't as bad as the storms that are still facing us in the near future. That pretty much is what I'm going to be talking about today. And I just need to share my screen if the system allows me to. Firoz, are you seeing my screen?
Not as yet. We can see you. And your lovely book collection.
Okay.
Here we go. You're up.
Excellent. So today I'm talking about the new shape of the future and why the future that we had anticipated is going to be very different, but in many ways very much the same. But I first want to ask you this question. Do you remember what the future used to look like, how we imagined the future? The strange thing about imagining what's coming next is how often we get it so right and how often we get it so wrong. And I thought it would be great to go back more than 100 years, in fact, 120 years exactly, to how we imagined the future. Back in 1900, a series of illustrations was created for the expo in Paris that year, and it was called In the Year 2000. And they looked at different areas of life, of work, and of education. And this was their perspective of the future of schooling. Bear in mind, this is before we even had a radio or television. And they imagined people learning through books being digitalized or digitized in this case, and then transmitted into people's brains. So we're not too far from that, but this year in particular saw the extent to which we are almost halfway to this vision. But it took the COVID-19 crisis and the remote working and remote learning trend and requirement really for us to start seeing how this was not such a far-fetched idea. The only far-fetched part of it is that it would be transmitted directly into our brains. But even that is not too far-fetched today. We already have the concept of brain to text and text to brain becoming a reality. Medical experiments are currently being conducted to show how brainwaves can be used to, in fact, create text that reflects what people are focused on or what they are thinking. So be very careful when you've had a few drinks too many and you're going to start drunk texting or drunk thinking, rather. That is 1900. This is 1910, and this was the 1910 version of exactly what I'm doing now. This is how a publication called the Nebraska State Journal perceived the idea of artists recording their music instead of performing in front of a crowd. Enrico Caruso was the first singer ever to record his art or his performance on record. But for the Nebraska State Journal, this is quite a bizarre concept, that instead of performing to a crowd, he was performing in front of, well, what would become microphones. They called it a row of black-mouthed funnels. So this is, in effect, what we are doing now with webinars. We are doing exactly what Caruso did back then, and finding it a little strange, talking to an audience through these funnels, except that for him, it was a way of expanding his business model. For us, it's become a necessity, but in the future, it'll be ingrained in our business models. 1918, Electrical Experimenter, a publication founded by Hugo Gernsback, who is one of the pioneers of science fiction. So he combined his knowledge of technology with the science fiction perspectives that were being created by writers at the time. And this was about a decade before the television was actually properly invented. So the concept of the television was in existence, but not the television itself. And he combined the idea of television with a telephot. A telephot is what we today know as video conferencing. A little off what we are experiencing right now, but in 1930, they actually got the future right. We might not have these black-mouthed funnels on our devices, but otherwise, it doesn't look very different. Just the shape is different. Oh, and that car in the background, I wish we had those as well. Then we move on to the 1940s, when Goodyear tried to express their vision of the future of public transport. What you must bear in mind that this was in the context of a post-war era when the idea of American dominance of the skies was a huge concept in the United States, and Goodyear leveraged this in their advertising. But they were suggesting that the idea of hailing a taxi from the air was just a few years away. That's why I say the 1940s was so 2010s, because for the past decade, we've been told that the idea of flying taxis is just a few years away. In fact, in last year's talk to First Technology, I spoke about Uber working with the Dubai authorities to launch air taxis by 2022. So that promise is still just around the corner, and we'll see in 2022 whether it actually happens. But my suspicion is that it's going to feel very much like the 1940s, when it was still just around the corner. And then we move on to 1965, the idea that already by now, our intelligence will be increased by drugs and by connecting our brains directly to computers. Now, this vision is perhaps extreme, but the only reason it's really extreme is because it's a little early. So we've already seen forecasts from the world of science and technology, as well as from medicine, that by 2028, we will be able to link our brains to computers in terms of being able to transmit our thoughts. The next step will be to receive information into our brains. That's perhaps a little further away, but it's not an extreme concept today, whereas it might have been 55 years ago. And then we come to this bizarre vision. Look at all these people rubbing shoulders, no masks, no social distancing. This was a vision of the future from January 2020. Remember, that was like decades ago. It feels like decades ago. But this was probably the last major international technology event before the shutdowns began. The next event was going to be Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, which was called off with days to go before it happened. So this kind of scene of the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January is now just a fond memory. CES has said that they will go back to a physical event in January next year. But the way the pandemic is spreading, it's unlikely that that's finally going to happen. We'll probably see, as with Mobile World Congress, one major exhibitor after another pulling out, and CES is going to have to come up with a virtual equivalent. What we'll probably find is that it will be a combination of physical and virtual. And what that means is that organizations are going to have to find ways of giving people a hands-on experience of their technology, but via virtual means. So whether that is virtual reality, which a lot of people still don't enjoy, or whether it is a really innovative way of presenting information, products, visuals, and the like via the internet remains to be seen. But we can expect that CES 2021 is going to set new ground rules for the way products are demonstrated, marketed, launched, and sold. Because between then and now, this is how the world of work changed. This is the new office. So if you actually have to appear on screen, you've got to put on a shirt, of course, and have a background that doesn't suggest you just got up. But this kind of scene and this kind of experience also tends to transition into this kind of scene and this kind of experience. So for many people, remote working is about really chilling at home. But the novelty wears off very fast. This is a headline in the Washington Post, just a few days into the remote working trend. This is early March, when one of their editors had been working at home for just over a week and decided that Netflix in quarantine was not that chill. But what I found really interesting about this was the fact that Netflix was used as the symbol of not quite working from home. So the question is, how did Netflix come to define relaxation? This is an important question for this audience, because Netflix is one of the great success stories of leveraging technology to put a business onto a new level. If you attended last year's First Technology event that I presented, yes, in person, then you'll know that the Netflix case study was a big part of that presentation. And I'll be giving a recap of that, a very brief recap shortly. But first, I want to show you the Google Trends for Netflix versus Zoom, because this tells us a lot about why Netflix defines the current era of social distancing. So Netflix has always had strong interest in terms of Google searches, and this shows Google Trends over the last 9 months or so. And it shows that the moment lockdown began, or the era of remote working began in March this year, there was a massive spike in interest in both Netflix and Zoom. And relative to where they were prior to the crisis, they both had a similar level of increase. Zoom came to define remote working and remote presenting, whereas Netflix came to define remote entertainment. Everyone abandoning cinemas, theaters, and restaurants and turning to Netflix and a bit of relaxation. And for work purposes, Zoom became the byword, although Teams, as you'll see shortly, was also one of the key beneficiaries. But these were the two big ones in terms of defining the era of social distancing. What was interesting is what came next, is that you saw gradual decline for interest in Netflix, with a few peaks depending on what they were launching when. But Zoom began a steady decline in interest as it became a standard tool for people, and as they also no longer needed to do a search to figure out how to get Zoom or how to download it. Netflix, on the other hand, is not just one application, but rather a platform on which content is constantly being launched. So there's constant levels of interest. But it's what happened in the last week that is really interesting. As the era of social distancing appeared to come to an end, and we saw the pandemic spike once again, and people went back to remote working, we saw interest in Zoom declining, and we're seeing interest in Netflix rise again. And you can see the two are now separating, whereas they pretty much tracked each other for the last couple of months. You now see Netflix pulling away again and Zoom declining in interest. This is probably bad news for productivity, but the truth is that Zoom is now almost part of the background of our work, so we don't have to search for it, whereas Netflix comes to the foreground of how we keep ourselves entertained. So to understand the change we see around us, we can't just look at those trend lines of what people are searching for. We also have to look at where people are spending their money. And if you follow the money, you start seeing what the real transformative trends in our society are going to be, but also where the hype exists. And you can see the hype in the way the money is being spent. So let me first show you the Netflix share price chart for the year to date. In other words, the last 6 months. And you can see Netflix is at an all-time high. But what's really interesting here is its market capitalization at $220 billion. Now, if you attended last year's event, you may remember that the market cap at that stage, end of March last year, was $160 billion. You can see the massive impact of lockdown and social distancing on the value of this business. The other interesting aspect that people always look at is the price-earnings ratio, which right now stands at 101. And what that means is that technically it should take 101 years for you to earn back your investment in Netflix at the current price. But what it really factors in is the expectation that the price is going to continue rising and that people will be able to make back their money, or that it'll justify its share price in a much shorter period. Let's look at what is perceived as the major rival, which is the Walt Disney Corporation. And here you see a totally different picture. The fact that the one is green and the other one is red shows you that the one is rising and the other one is falling. This is Disney over the last 6 months. And there was great expectations for them because of them launching their Disney Plus service in competition with Netflix and taking all the Star Wars properties in particular, as well as the Marvel Comics Universe properties back from Netflix and having it available only on the Walt Disney properties on Disney Plus. But it didn't particularly help them too much, because what also affects their share price is the fact that they are heavily engaged in the physical world through the Disney resorts, Disney World, Disneyland around the world. And the result of that is that you've actually seen almost a plummeting of their market capitalization. So for the first time, their market cap has fallen below that of Netflix. They are $206 billion compared to Netflix's $220 billion. The PE ratio is far more sane, though, at 38, but that also reflects people's lack of enthusiasm for the share. They don't expect it to be particularly exciting for the next while, at least until the resorts open. Once the resorts reopen, Disney will be a totally different proposition. So let's look at Netflix and its founder and his ideas. This was part of what I presented last year, and I'm going to give you a very short recap of what Reed Hastings told us in an interview last year, because as much as it might be a year and a half old or so, it is as relevant today as it was back then. Firstly, this was how Netflix destroyed Blockbuster. In 1985, Blockbuster was founded and quickly became a byword in entertainment. By 1994, worth $8.4 billion, bought by Viacom and controlled the world of video entertainment. But they upset Reed Hastings because they charged him a ridiculous amount for a late return. He founded Netflix, and after a few hiccups, they started rising dramatically. When Blockbuster went bankrupt in 2010, they were worth, in terms of their fire sale value, only $24 million. At that stage, Netflix was worth something like $3 billion. By 2017, $65 billion. Last year, $160 billion. And this week, that insane level of $220 billion. So my favorite picture, because I have to prove always to people that I actually did speak to him personally, that it wasn't something that I Googled. So Reed Hastings' Secrets of the Future, I've distilled into 4 key rules that he shared in that interview. Firstly, with regard to competition, and this is a critical element to understand, the more competition there is and the better the competition, the better the industry will be. So I asked him specifically about HBO at that stage, which was about to launch the final season of Game of Thrones, which was clearly going to be the big entertainment event of last year. And he said they've grown at the same time as we have. So it's not their success that results in our failure, but our success depends on ourselves. Their success depends on them. So we don't see the competition as opposition. And the reason for that is that if you have great competitors, you have a better industry. And that's why yesterday's announcement that Walmart will be entering the same sector won't scare Netflix. For Netflix, the fact that Walmart is also going to launch a streaming service is great news, because it means there'll be even more investment in content. There'll be great content for people to look forward to, and everyone is going to up their game. Everyone is going to have to do an even better job. And that's the real benefit of great competition and serious competition. But more significantly for this audience is his attitude towards technology. We tend to be terrified by the fast pace of technology change. And what Reed says is that technology is your friend. Firstly, not everything is perfect. We need to improve our user interface all the time. And for that, they turn to technology, they turn to analytics and to artificial intelligence. By constantly analyzing their data and using artificial intelligence to optimize their systems, they can keep seeing what is a frustration to their user, what is keeping the user from having the ideal experience on their platform, and therefore to keep enhancing it. And that is what every company should be doing. If you have a large customer base, then you need to be using the tools available to you to ensure that you are serving your customers in the best way possible. And then the issue of the pace of change. For him, that is Netflix's friend, because the more technology improves, the more things can get faster, better, and I love his term, more wonderful. So what he's saying is leverage rather than fear the rapid advance in technology. So the question that emerges from this is, what technology is everyone leveraging now? Because a year ago, you could well have said, yeah, that's Netflix's issue. That's not really our story. In fact, we don't have to worry about where technology is going. We're only concerned about our customers. But in fact, if you are concerned about your customers, then you also have to leverage technology. So I'm going to show you a couple more businesses that are thriving in this time because everyone is leveraging their technology. The first one is obvious, Zoom. This is the Zoom price from beginning of the year to now. And from almost nowhere, they have a market cap of $74 billion. This is a company that is barely making a profit. But look at that price earnings ratio, 1,461. That is crazy. The choice of investing in Zoom depends heavily on how much disposable income you have, but also on your risk profile. My risk profile certainly doesn't allow for me to invest in a company with a PE ratio of 1,461. Look at the platform that companies like Zoom and Netflix rely on. And then you can see a far more rational price earnings ratio, although still exceptionally high, but also a thriving business, and that is Amazon. Amazon's PE ratio, firstly, is 145, which is 1/10 that of Zoom. But look at the value of this company, $1.5 trillion. It's one of 5 tech companies today that is worth more than $1 trillion on the market. The others are being Microsoft, Google, Apple, and one more that will come to me. But the truth of the matter is that they are thriving because they are providing the platform on which other businesses are able to thrive. It's not just because they're able to sell more products. It's not because the e-commerce service has become the world's biggest online store. And it's not just because they hire tens of thousands of people to meet the demand. It's also because they have something called Amazon Web Services, which is the world's biggest cloud computing platform. And that word platform I'll come back to in a moment. The biggest competitor is Microsoft. And look at their market cap, $1.6 trillion, also thriving in this time. Their PE ratio, far more sane than the others, 35. Now, if I was an investor looking at PE ratios and trying to match that to a risk profile, this is the share that I would be looking at. But if you look at their growth trajectory, just to show you again, Amazon versus Microsoft, clearly Amazon has a far smoother growth trajectory. But that's also because Microsoft has never been seen as being as sexy as the likes of Amazon and Netflix. But they get their job done. And that's the key to their success and thriving in this time. The very fact that you're all watching this on Teams is an indication of that particular trend. What is the fundamental difference between the likes of Amazon and Microsoft on the one side and Zoom on the other side, and even Netflix for that matter? Why are these companies thriving when they don't seem to be the tools that everyone is using? You'd think only Zoom and Netflix would be thriving right now, but in fact, the reality of the service they provide to the other companies is what makes the difference. And it's one word, and that word is platform. So these are a few books on the concept of the platform revolution, the platform scale, co-authored by a gentleman by the name of Sangeet Paul Chowdhury. And I had the great privilege of coming across him in recent weeks when he co-authored this paper, Can Africa Take the Platform Economy Forward? Produced by Standard Bank and co-authored by two of their executives along with Sangeet. And this week they launched this paper in South Africa, and I had the opportunity to chat with Sangeet. I always have to prove that I've actually spoken to these people in person because everyone is always Googling their quotes and replicating those quotes that you're seeing everywhere on the internet. But I had one particular area of interest that I wanted to address with him, and that was how the platform economy differs in different territories, countries, or sectors, because that is a major differentiation that came up in his books. And he had two pictures that he shared. One was Silicon Valley's platform companies, and that's the ones I've just been talking about, Amazon, Microsoft, and the like. And the key difference between those and platform companies in emerging markets is that the Silicon Valley platform companies are able to leverage underlying infrastructure. So the internet, the payment system, delivery networks, having the logistics services like FedEx and UPS able to deliver within hours, having every payment system available to you means that half the work has already been done. And then their apps are built on existing operating systems, Android, iOS, Windows. Their website is accessible through any browser. And then a company like Uber, which in fact resides on Amazon Web Services, utilizes these layers via AWS and then adds Google Maps to that. And Google Maps also is part of this entire platform environment. So if you have the ingenuity and you're able to connect the dots, it's relatively straightforward to create a platform business in the United States. Of course, then you've got to get customers to come on board. You've got to also have lucky breaks like Zoom did. Unlucky for the world, but lucky for Zoom. What's the other picture that we in South Africa and across Africa are more likely to experience? Well, he gives China as the example of a different kind of platform revolution. It was led by government initiatives to create public digital infrastructures. The downside of that is that we have something called the Great Firewall of China, which is China's attempt to control anything that any person in China is able to access online. The upside of that is that companies like Alibaba and Tencent were able to create business models that thrived in this environment. Now, add to those business models the online payment systems that have become ubiquitous in China, and also a countrywide identity management system, not only a government mandated system, but one that was created by the likes of Tencent and Alibaba. And you suddenly have the stage set for a new platform revolution that doesn't depend on the kind of advantages that Silicon Valley has. Now, Sangeet believes that this is a model that is most likely to take off across Africa, and that it'll be led by the banking platforms, but also assisted by the telecoms organizations. So then the question is, how are South African companies coping in this revolution? How are they addressing the platform revolution? Are they part of it? Are they left behind? I'm going to share my favorite case study with you. You may have heard of this company. It's called First Technology. And why they are such a great case study is that March 2020 was one of their busiest months yet. This was something that was shared with me by the CEO, Johan de Villiers, when I wrote a column on what it takes to thrive in this new environment in my Sunday Times, Business Times column a few months ago. So I asked this famous gentleman for the secret of how to thrive amid chaos. Yes, coffee is one of the secrets, but the real secret is that they were ready for the future. When most companies were scrambling to set up their staff, First Technology were there to supply the tools that other companies needed to set up their staff. So that's part of the picture. But if that was all that it was, then every IT company would be thriving. And in fact, many small IT businesses are collapsing at the moment because their customer base suddenly vanished. But First Technology was already cloud-based. Their transactions were ready to go completely online, and their staff were ready to work remotely almost at the click of a button. And most significantly, from my perspective, because I see things through a marketing perspective, they were able to go 100% digital in their marketing initiatives. So this was a future-ready business. And I want to give you the comparison of another future-ready business, and that was Cisco. Their WebEx traffic, now WebEx is the competitor to Teams and Zoom and the like, increased 22-fold in March this year once people began working remotely. They had 20 billion meeting minutes in that month. But instead of scrambling to try to keep up with the demand, they were looking for ways to assist everyone else who was struggling with this new normal, with remote working. And their very first step was to offer unlimited usage on the free version, which up to that point was limited in terms of time and participants. And they also began working closely with non-governmental organizations to allow schools to use their tool at no cost. And the bottom line was almost exactly the same as with First Technology, but of course on a different level and on a global level, that instead of being bogged down by the crisis, they were prepared for the future, for any future, not necessarily a crisis future, but one that would require them to scale up very fast and also to pivot their business model very fast as well. So instead of having to deal with the crisis, they became an enabler for other companies trying to deal with the crisis. And that's the same as with the first model. And then look what happened next as a result of this. By the middle of last month, over 3 months, Microsoft Teams had 894% growth in base users. And this explains that share price graph and that insane market capitalization. Zoom grew by 677%, also helps explain it. Cisco's share price hasn't benefited as much, but their business massively. Volumes up 400% since the middle of March. And the common factor amongst all of these is the fact that They are all tools of collaboration, and that is one of the absolute keys to this new abnormal. Part of it is this concept. It's a phrase that we've come up with to try to explain what's really happening. When organizations embrace digital and it becomes possible to do anything online, whether it's live collaboration or a live event with an unlimited number of people, it's not just about change. It's also about everyone being able to feel that change, everyone being part of that change. And once we're all part of the change, it's not just digital transformation, it's an awareness of that transformation. And that awareness we call digital awakening. Let's look at it from the context of the South African corporation. We've conducted a research project with Cisco, which we're likely to release in the next few weeks, but this is a sneak preview of it. One of the questions we asked was how advanced South African companies were in digital transformation prior to the crisis, and 37% said they had fully rolled it out. Then we asked them, after lockdown ends, will you allow your staff to continue working remotely? And the proportion that said yes was almost exactly the same, 38%, which told us that digital transformation also translated into digital readiness. So they were ready for this new future. It tells us that the crisis is not what digitally transformed the world. It does tell us that the extent to which you are digitally transformed is a key to thriving in this new environment. But the crisis, in fact, revealed the extent to which companies needed to be digitally transformed. It highlighted those that were digitally transformed. All of those graphs that you saw earlier of rising share prices all reflected the extent to which companies were digitally transformed already. And it highlighted also by those that weren't thriving, the extent to which the physical world still bogged them down. So digital awakening, in other words, is a dividend of digital transformation, but it's also a consequence of digital transformation. Then let's look at another set of numbers. We conduct an annual online retail project in South Africa looking at the size of the market. And most of the statistics you see on online retail in this country come from our research. You might have seen that online retail makes up 1.4% of total retail in South Africa. And also the fact that we are only likely to reach 2% in the next 2 or 3 years. But this was another set of stats that we found in that research. Only 4% of South Africans were shopping online regularly 2 years ago. Last year, that number went up proportionately, significantly, to 6%. And we expected it to go up even more significantly this year, proportionately speaking. But when lockdown came, suddenly all the rules changed. Nielsen did a research project to look at how many South Africans were shopping online, how they were shopping, and what they were doing. But that number they came up with was so significant to us, 37%. Exactly the same proportion as companies that were digitally transformed. Before you think that the two are related, it's pure coincidence. But it's an example of correlation not being the same as causation. On the other hand, we are going to see massive causation from those kind of numbers because we're seeing more than a third of businesses and more than a third of consumers embracing the digital world. Many are because they're forced to do so. And we will see once lockdown ends, once the crisis is over, a lot of people will go back to doing things physically. Many people don't enjoy the digital world. Many people prefer shopping in malls or physical retail, and they'll go back to that. But for many others, it is making so much more sense to do it this way, and they'll continue operating in this way. The real bottom line to that set of stats is that as it makes more and more sense to more and more people, we're going to see the real shape of the future emerging. Because what we're seeing at the moment is just a semblance of the future. It's a taste of the future. We're going to be having a second session in the next few weeks where we'll explore specific sectors and specific technologies in terms of how the shape of change will affect you, how it will affect every sector in our economy, and the specific technologies that will play a role in that as well. Meanwhile, the big question is, what happens next? And no one can forecast, no one can predict exactly what's going to happen. If they could, a lot of people will be making a lot of money on the stock market, for example. And I suppose some will, because some will guess what happens next. But we can give a context for what happens next. And I'm going to share with you a model that was developed by Nielsen. They're a global media research organization. And they looked at a wide range of activities, but also mapping those against the likely evolution of the era of social distancing, lockdown, and remote working and living. So the first horizon they looked at was for the first 3 months, in other words, leading up to where we are right about now. And we come to the end of this particular phase of the crisis. But the most interesting aspects of this are what you see on the far right of the screen, the trends that they're expecting, which is that people will exercise financial restraint because they don't know where their money is going to come from or whether there will be money coming in the coming months and years. Local patronage is a very significant one. People supporting local businesses because they don't want to travel too far to conduct their business. And they'll appreciate essentials. And I think we've seen those kind of trends playing themselves out. The next phase, which is what we're entering at the moment, is as people start rebooting their lives. And we're seeing this in the retail industry, especially. Every retailer in the world virtually has had to go into a phase of reboot. But where we are as consumers and as businesses, we're moving from supporting local businesses to relying on local businesses. And this isn't just in terms of your local suburb as a consumer, but also as a business relying on local suppliers. And there we're not just talking about the city and suburb, but also the country, because it's become so difficult to bring in supplies from other countries. And look at the yellow area of this graph. Below local reliance, you have social solidarity. And that is something that we saw from the beginning of lockdown, when we saw the greatest social cohesion this country has had since the 2010 FIFA Soccer World Cup. Social solidarity was suddenly part of our landscape again. I'll come back to that in a moment. Financial constraints are starting to be felt heavily, and then reliant on essentials rather than focusing on essentials is also another big shift that we are now going to experience. So what that tells us is a shift in nuance rather than a dramatic change in the environment. And this takes us through to around September. But what happens after that is that life becomes a lot more scary. We had all hoped that it would be over by then, but every forecast tells us that September is likely to be the period when South Africa really goes into crisis mode. The projections for Gauteng are that we might see a tenfold increase in the level of infections. And that is just an example of one region. It's likely to be a similar experience throughout the country and possibly throughout the world. September is not life back to normal. September is when we have to start reinventing our life and our world. Now look at the red area again on the right-hand side of the table. And this shows us that the shift in nuance has now moved or will move to a massive shift in the experience of the world. So instead of just being reliant on local services, we'll be dependent on local services. As opposed to social solidarity, we'll see a social backlash. And that's already begun. We're already seeing protests. We're already seeing massive resistance in certain sectors to the level of lockdown. And where the president's popularity rating soared after the initial lockdown announcement, we're now starting to see it decline. And as there are more complexities and more contradictions in the level of lockdown, we'll see that decline even further, and we'll see an even greater social backlash. And that will come also as a result of financial desperation of many people. We're seeing more job losses all the time, not people going back to work in droves as a result of lockdown ending. And as a result of that, we're going to see consumers as well as businesses surviving on the basics. Discretionary spending is going to be a thing of the past in this era. Of course, we hope that things will work out better, but this currently is the scenario that faces us based on the current trends that we are seeing. So unfortunately, there is no good news in this regard, but there is a glimmer of light. There are many strategies underpinning all of these responses, and every industry will adapt in a different way. They'll all resurface in a different way. But as I hope I've shared with you through this presentation, there is an element that will assist in this response, that will assist in adapting and resurfacing, because every industry will have one thing in common. It's that digital transformation will not be a choice, and digital awakening will be a necessity for the new future. And that is the real new shape of the future, is that we will all be digitally awake. We'll no longer be arguing about which way to go or how to address the future, because we'll all be able to see the shape of the future in front of us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. That was quite insightful. Just give Arthur a chance to turn off his sharing. There we go. Thank you very much, Arthur. That was quite insightful. I think it was an interesting conversation being had there. Webinars are a bit strange, isn't it? Because you're having a one-way conversation as opposed to the experiences we often have in our events, where it ends up being two-way. I mean, we discussed that at length yesterday. So if I could ask anyone in the audience, if you've got any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'm going to keep Arthur on hold for another minute or so if there's any questions for him. Specifically, perhaps while we're waiting for any questions, I can just touch on two things. Arthur picked two of my favorite companies that I'm watching as trends. I mean, there's a lot of companies we watch, Disney and Netflix. Disney is an amazing company in terms of its size. It's just its pure magnitude and diversification. Its diverse investments, its portfolio, all the way from sports channels, sports networks, cruise liners, and obviously the famous Disney parks, and now Disney Plus, which is not available in South Africa yet, not without VPN anyway. So thank goodness for some shortcuts on technology there. So I think that's an interesting landscape to watch in terms of the PEs that you've illustrated, Zoom versus Microsoft and Netflix, at Disney, etc. But I think that those are interesting times, and I think it is Warren Buffett that said that you only make money when there's blood on the streets. Which is sounds quite horrific, but it's a reality. So from an investment point of view, one has got to pick those very carefully. But yeah, thank you for that. And then the digital awakening is an interesting statement as well. It builds on the digital transformation, which is a very tech discussion. But the digital awakening talks to many things that creates a reality in terms of the transformation needed in people, the culture as well. Because you can't just transform technology to make it work. You need the culture and the process to follow it as well. So that was an interesting statement. And I think the one thing that I've seen in chats with customers, and most of you are on the line, I speak to most of you often, is that whole shift. And you illustrated September as a kind of a marker for this whole wave of COVID. And as sad as it is, I think it's inevitable. And that's a reality. So what we're starting to see is that companies are starting to understand this, what was deemed to be temporary before, as we're going to lockdown, guys, is temporary, let's just get the job done, is becoming a reality. And that reality has got no deadline. There's no kind of, guys, 1 October we're back, 1 January we're back, next financial year we're back. Nobody really knows. There's a couple of markers we're all waiting for, things like the vaccine and treatments, etc. But we know we're close to having a definitive point where we can say we're going back to the way we were. And I think the reality is coming to the fore now, is that we're never going back the way we were. It's gone, guys. It's by. We've been forced to change, and you can't rewind that. And we need to now accept that our methods of working has to adapt, not just for today in this temporary state we're in, but in terms of the vision going forward, and leverage the efficiencies and the tools that has forced us to adopt during this period. And so a lot of the conversations go around, how do I manage my users? Now, companies that had 300 users had maybe one site or two offices, two sites, and it was easy from a technology management point of view, security management point of view, etc. And yeah, it was easy because those tech teams supported those users. Security risk profiles were managed through that. And they were naturally remote users as well, but it wasn't at the magnitude we're talking about now. And what we're seeing is that shift of a company having 300, well, maybe it's 70% of that population, maybe it's 210 people working from home at this stage. But they are all sites now. They all are users who consume technology as a separate site, and the overload of that from a support point of view, the issues, the management is changing the game. And people are starting to understand that's a new dynamic, which we never really considered before. And now we've got to look at mechanisms, smarter ways for management, smarter ways for security, smarter ways for end user computing, to allow that adaptation of services and technologies. Yeah, but that was cool. Thank you very much, Arthur. I don't see any questions, so I'm going on the assumption that you delivered an excellent discussion there. And I love your case study, by the way. Thank you. Cool. So to introduce our next speaker, his name is Yannick Kunegel. Yannick is from EMEA, based in France. He runs the territory, is a director for HCI and what they call VMware Cloud. For those of you who don't know what HCI or VMware Cloud is, now's the right time to get a bearing on that. It's an interesting discussion. Again, we're talking to this world that is evolving rapidly, and how do we adapt our systems to support that cultural change, to support the system change, support the business requirements going forward, as digital transformation isn't just on the desktop or the client or the users, it's also on the back end of what supports those evolutions of business requirements. So I'm going to hand over to Yannick. Yannick, thank you very much for joining us. It's always appreciated. The video calls we had over the last week or two, I was a little bit envious. I was sitting in a thick jacket and you were sitting in a t-shirt, illustrating that you're in summer, obviously. So we're in the cold weather, but it's kind of okay today from a temperature point of view, except for the pending storm, which we'll see how that works out. But yeah, if I can hand over to you, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Feroz, for the invitation, and I'd like to thank Arthur as well for the very insightful presentation. I think I should also start apologizing for breaking the flow of the lovely South African accent and bringing a French accent in the webinar. I hope you can all understand me well. So. And you're absolutely right. I'm actually sitting south part of France, and the temperature is 28 degrees as we speak. So it is lovely. Let me share my presentation, and I hope you can see it.
Yeah, I'll check. There we go. It's up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So good morning, everyone. In today's presentation, I will mainly be focusing on why at VMware we believe that building a foundation for hybrid cloud infrastructure is key and probably more critical today than it's ever been before to shore up today, but also prepare for tomorrow. So in the agenda that I've discussed as well with Feroz, thinking about what would be interesting topics to touch on, I thought it would be, without spending too much time on this, because I'm sure you've all been overwhelmed with a lot of presentations and sessions and webinars on business continuity in the last 3 months. But ignoring the current context and climate is also difficult. So I wanted to touch on a few points there. Going back to the VMware vision that has been there for many years, but I think it's a foundation for everything we do at VMware. And it's good always to go back to that vision and understanding it before we progress on the presentation and touch on why we believe that foundation is essential to guarantee business resilience and innovation, and hopefully conclude then. Touching on the current context and climate, I think we would all agree that we've gone through challenging times, and Arthur touched on it as well. I think it's very difficult to predict how long this is going to last, but for sure it has a drastic and very important impact on all of us in our lives, in our business. And I think we all agree that technology leadership will probably ideal lead organization towards business resilience, right? And every single business is now facing some very challenging questions and has faced very challenging questions over the last 3 years. How do we respond to protect our employees was key first, and then the partners and the business. What are the areas of the business that we should adapt? How do we go back to growth quicker and thrive? How do we protect both ourselves and our business for the future? And how do we build a digital foundation as well for growth? So all those aspects, I'm sure all leaders in any business are asking themselves those questions on pretty much on a daily basis. Arthur touched on the different phases that he could foresee, and I think analysts probably share those thoughts there, even if the timelines associated to each phase are not necessarily well defined. At VMware, we came up with a framework or a model which comprises 3 phases. The first one was more a response phase, looking at the future, but the first phase was really the response. Now organizations were dealing with the crisis itself, and this phase for most organizations is probably behind us, and that was about enabling business continuity for the workforce, allowing our employees to work from home in order not to disrupt the business too much and continue doing business in the first place. Now, most of us and most of you hopefully are probably in the second phase, where you have had more time to reflect as opposed to respond urgently to a changing situation, and we call that phase adapt. And this is more proactive stance as opposed to reactive stance, and this is more starting making investments in order to gain flexibility and agility, because what became obvious is organizations who had already an IT organization that enabled agility and flexibility were able to respond, were in a better position to respond to the crisis in the first place. So investments are mainly now related to optimizing cost or gaining complexity. Eliminating complexity, gaining flexibility and agility. There is a nice quote that I was reading the other day from a CIO who also happens to be a member of the advisory board of IDC, who was saying that 2020 is going to be the year of safe bets only, and all the investments will be prioritized to help optimize cost. Cash is king, and this is most likely to last for a significant part, or maybe the remaining of 2020 and potentially longer, depending on how the pandemic situation evolves around the world. But that's mainly the situation and position most of us are in at the moment. And then it's a position related to a slowdown and a potential recession, obviously. And the third phase is really related to going back to innovation and growth as we exit the recession. And again, this is about how organization will move to embracing digital and developing new ways of doing business. And the one who have been able to adapt and build in flexibility and agility in their operation in the first place are also most likely to come out stronger when time to innovate will come. Now, touching on the VMware vision, and if some of you have attended VMware presentation in the past, which I hope is the case, you've probably seen this slide a few times then, and the good reason for that is that our vision hasn't much evolved in the last 5 years at least, and we've been quite consistent in executing on that vision, and this has done through development of technologies on the VMware side or many acquisitions that we have made in the last few years. And our vision is quite simple. It's about running any application, and by any application we mean the traditional apps that run in your data center, the typical 2-tier, 3-tier applications that you're used to, but also as the portfolio of application is evolving, how we support running cloud-native application, and I'll touch more on this a bit later in the presentation, or applications delivered as a service. So any application running on any cloud, and any cloud is your own private cloud, public cloud, the edge, and with consistent operation and consistent infrastructure, which is key. And again, I will elaborate more on this point, which is what will allow you to really run any application on any location without adding complexity to your operations. And accessing those applications that run on any cloud from any device. And again, with people working from home, the portfolio of devices that we all use to work is evolving as well. And with that, as applications run in different places, the nature of application varies, the locations they run, and how we access applications from different locations is evolving as well. The perimeter and is changing, obviously, which has an impact on how we guarantee security in that evolving context. And having built in an intrinsic security is becoming key as well, which is an area where VMware has significantly invested in the last few years. So this is very much our vision. In the rest of the presentation, I will mainly be focusing on the any cloud piece and touching on the any application aspect as well. So how do we build a foundation for business resilience and innovation? And with this, I think we've all been in sessions in the past where some vendors, sometimes we're opposing public cloud and private cloud. But I think the world has come to a consensus that it's not one or the other, it's actually both. And this is a result of a study made by 451 Research recently, where 57% of the respondents were clearly acknowledging that they were moving toward a hybrid IT environment that leverages both on-premise systems and off-premise systems. And there are good reasons for that, obviously, right? Private cloud is very cost-effective for data-intensive application, where you don't have the need to spin up or down your application, where governance is needed, which is easier to apply in your private cloud, when your data is precious, and always data locality does matter. And also private cloud comes with a lot of benefits from a tool set and knowledge perspective, because your IT organization is very much qualified to operate it already. Now, on the other hand, of course, public cloud has also some benefits that are difficult to ignore, and those are related to moving more to a consumption model, or as we talk about developing a new set of application for a digital future. The development tool set available in the public cloud are very appealing to a developer community, or to a line of business who wants to quickly kick off a new project or initiative, tapping into resources directly available. So there are pros and cons and advantages for both, which is why the consensus of a hybrid cloud makes a lot of sense. Now the question is, how do we maintain consistency across those two, so that it doesn't come at the expense of complexity? With the situation we faced over the last 3 months, maybe some organizations had to move faster than expected to the public cloud as well. And we've seen many organizations to enable their workforce to work from home, firing up desktops in the cloud, virtual desktops, I mean, just to support a remote workforce. Other organizations in the retail, for instance, on e-commerce, have seen massive hikes in their or spikes in the demand as well, and have used the cloud as to absorb the growing demand. This has probably been the case for organizations like Netflix themselves as well, because they had to cope with significant more demand from the internet. Others have looked at it to enable business continuity. So there are many good reasons why customers have been using the cloud more recently, and this is probably gonna become the new norm as well. So what are we doing actually to make this simpler? And I'm not sure if many of you have heard about a solution called VMware Cloud Foundation, which is really the foundation for our cloud operating model. And what we see here is, our recommendation is, in order to remove some complexity, is to first start modernizing, and modernizing by moving towards a software-defined data center solution. And by this, we mean virtualizing compute, which most of you have probably done for many years already. And here, vSphere, which is our virtualization platform, is a clear leader with about 80% of the enterprise workloads being virtualized on that platform. But when we talk about moving to a software-defined data center, we go way beyond this. We talk about virtualizing storage as well, where enterprise class storage features are now provided by software on traditional x86 servers loaded with drives. But probably even more importantly, virtualizing network functions and moving from features delivered by physical hardware, routing, for instance, load balancers, firewalls, IPS, IDS devices, all sorts of devices. And we provide all those features with software running on the x86. So it's all about simplifying and providing all these features running in software with less components in your data center. Right. So the first recommendation is to really turn this into a software-defined data center, and then bring on top of this a cloud operating model. And by this we mean cloud model from an operation standpoint, for things like capacity planning, chargeback potentially, log analytics, everything that gives you visibility into the workloads that run in your data center, and also help you make good decisions from a planning perspective. But also turning these services that IT can offer into a real service catalog, right, which is cloud automation. Right, so that's really the second step. Now, what is important is surrounding all of this with security, and this is why we've invested so much in security and to provide intrinsic security across the stack, be it at the hypervisor level, be it at the storage level, and be it across all the network functions that we do provide. Now, customers are left with two options. They can either build these software-defined data centers themselves, and we have recipes on how to do this, or what we are seeing a growing appetite for is more turning into buying a solution that has been engineered. Because many organizations have realized that the role of IT is probably not anymore to, manage infrastructure, but to focus more on how to support the business or business initiatives, and therefore any initiatives that will simplify the day-to-day IT operations is welcome. And VMware Cloud Foundation is all about bringing that software-defined data center solution into an engineered platform that is automatically deployed at the customer data center, but also with automated lifecycle management throughout the time those systems are actually deployed in your data center. So simplifying the deployment, which means accelerating time to market, and simplifying day two operations, which means less challenges or less time for IT teams to actually update, patch the environment, expand, scale out the environment, etc., etc. Now, what we've done is making this fully integrated stack available not only on-premise in your own data center, but also using the same common platform across multiple clouds. So public clouds, and I'll touch more on this, but also among a variety of service providers that are part of VMware Cloud Providers program, so that you get a consistent set of operations and infrastructure where you can decide where it is better without adding complexity to your operations to run your workloads. Without going into the details, the components that are making up the software-defined data center stack, be it at the hypervisor level, and how we virtualize storage, how we virtualize network functions, and how we provide cloud management, automation, and operations, all those components are leader in their own space. And this is acknowledged by both in terms of market shares as well as by a well-known analyst, and I don't probably have to mention names here, you probably know who I'm referring to. So it's really about integrating best of breed technologies into the software-defined data centers that we provide. Just touching on a good example of a customer who did take advantage of a VMware Cloud Foundation and some of the benefits that they have observed. This is an organization in the financial services, 11. They are in the top 5 global payment provider globally, and processing more than 5 billion online transactions a year. It was a fast-growing organization, and the main challenges they were facing was one, to ensure that they would remain PCI compliant, being a financial services organization, for the variety of applications that they were providing, but also how to scale their application out of different locations quicker, right? So it was all about time to market, which ended up being a challenge for this fast-growing organization. They adopted VMware Cloud Foundation out of multiple locations, and they've seen some significant results. Being able to deploy a full software-defined data center stack in only 2 days, while it would take them at least a couple of months in the past to deploy a similar piece of infrastructure. Realizing savings from a CapEx perspective up to 26%, combining all hardware, software, services to deploy the solution. And here we're not touching on the OpEx gains that they observed afterwards as well, but also significant savings in footprint in the data center by up to 70%. So the momentum and the adoption of VMware Cloud Foundation is massive. This is an area of VMware business that is growing triple-digit on a yearly basis, and we do really see VMware Cloud Foundation becoming the new vSphere for our customers. Now, we talked about hybrid clouds, and in the next few slides, I will touch more on how VMware Cloud Foundation is really the simplest path to the hybrid cloud itself. And I mentioned it before, VMware Cloud Foundation obviously is available to be deployed on-premise, and this is then managed by the customer, even if the day-to-day management is highly simplified because of all the automation and the lifecycle management that we bring in. But for it to be really a platform for enabling hybrid cloud, it means that we've also developed very strong partnership, and we've developed partnership with the top 6 cloud providers globally, be it AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Oracle Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, IBM Cloud, So the same foundation is available across all those 6 major cloud providers, and is also available among more than 4,000 VMware cloud providers who make this stack available to their own customers, probably more regional customers. So you get that consistent piece of infrastructure and operations across those different entities. In some cases, it's managed by the customer. When it's on-premise, typically, it can be managed by a VMware cloud provider when it's partner managed. And we've also have a special agreement and partnership with Amazon, with VMware Cloud and AWS, where you can consume the service, which is then managed by VMware directly. We will soon in EMEA have a similar offering called VMware Cloud on Dell EMC, which can be deployed on-premise then, where it's the same VMware Cloud Foundation deployed on-premise on Dell EMC hardware and managed by VMware. So a similar experience to what customers can see with VMware Cloud on AWS, but then deployed in their own data center. Now, this all really makes a lot of sense if you enable true workload mobility, because we've seen organization customers struggling at times, not necessarily moving to the public cloud, but exiting the public cloud to select another cloud provider, which might be more appealing for either the services they provide or from a cost perspective, or potentially moving back their workloads to their own data center because they did realize that for some specific workloads, it was more appropriate to run them on premise for governance, for data locality, for cost reasons, for many potential reasons. Right, so here again we've developed some technology which is called HCX that enables true workload mobility. Mobility between your own data centers on premise, and the typical use case for that is when customers are migrating from the existing infrastructure to VMware Cloud Foundation. Of course, there is a need to migrate workloads to the new platform, and HCX makes a lot of sense then. It does allow for migration in batches, could be planned where you can overnight decide with consistency group to migrate hundreds of virtual machines in one batch, or you can do this, by the way, either when the virtual machines are offline, or they can be online as well, as a real live migration of the workloads without any downtime. But we can do the same, migrating the virtual machines from your data center to the public cloud as well. And here I'm referring to any of the offerings that I've touched on earlier, being a service provider or being one of the top 6 cloud providers that I've mentioned. Right, and moving the workloads to them or moving your workloads back. So it does enable true workload mobility both ways for additional flexibility. Now, what I'm not mentioning here, which is probably worth touching on as well, is we do have additional solutions in our portfolio that gives you the right level of visibility. And if you have never heard about a solution called Cloud Health helps you not optimize only resources you run in your own data center to potentially reduce the footprint, but also look at where it is more cost effective to run your application. So looking at your existing workloads, would it make more sense to run them in the cloud? And then on which cloud? Do you have ways to reduce your Amazon bill, for instance? So it gives and provides a lot of insights on where it is and where it is more appropriate to run your workloads, and how to optimize the cost associated to running your workloads in a given place. Now, switching gear a little bit and touching on the application itself. I think it is probably we would all agree, that business, any business feels the pressure to provide a compelling digital experience to their customers, and this means, by this I mean moving faster from development to application, because innovation in our world and in the digital world, of course, is always related and only related to a new set of applications. So how do organizations move quicker from a development cycle to an application running in production? How do they reiterate on the application to incorporate feedback from their customers and make the experience better, right? So with this in mind, it's not really a surprise that in a survey conducted by Forrester Consulting in February 2020, CIOs have mentioned that improving application portfolio was a top priority for them by 78%. Now, at the same time, 48% of them said that they had made no improvement in the last year, right? Which obviously cannot be seen as something very positive. And there is a good reason for that. First, developing application and cloud-native application is not something that is easy. It's clearly lacking standards. And if you have multiple teams developing applications, getting any form of consistency here from an operations perspective is challenging. So matching the best platform for every application is challenging, which is slowing down the move from development to production for those set of applications. The last two challenges that have been outlined were clearly the challenges around the current infrastructure not being agile enough and flexible enough to deploy application fast enough, and the fact that IT teams were also very much focused on keeping the light on in their own data center and having not enough time to basically support new initiatives. Right? So the definition of an application has changed as well. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the traditional applications, and here we're talking about the traditional 2-tier, 3-tier application where you have your database, the application tier, and sometimes a web tier as well, front-ending the application. Those applications are not going to disappear. They are here to last for probably many years, and they're running in your data center. They will keep running in your data center for a long time. But there is, of course, a growing interest in developing applications that are called modern applications or cloud-native applications based on microservices. So as opposed to having one monolithic application based on microservices means that you basically split the different functions of an application into different services, and you can then enhance each service without having to impact the other services of the same application. So it's supposed to provide more agility on how you enhance the application with less disruption. Facebook, for instance, are providing hundreds of new updates every day to the application without us even noticing it, right? So this is the idea, and I'm sure some of you are probably very familiar with this. So, which is why this is quite appealing for many organizations who are looking at innovate and continuously enhancing the experience they provide to their customer. Now, those applications typically run on containers. They don't run on traditional virtual machines. They run on containers. And one standard that has emerged here for the management of containers is Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is an open system that is developed by the community, and VMware today is in the top 2 or top 3 contributors of Kubernetes itself. And what Kubernetes does is nothing else than the automation, the scaling, and the management of containers. Right? Now, what is interesting is if you look at trends, IDC in a study made a couple of years ago now was forecasting that in the 2019 to 2024 period, 500 million applications will be developed using cloud-native technologies, right? And putting this in perspective, 500 million application is probably as many, if not more, than the application that has been developed in the last 40 years. So things are accelerating drastically on that front. Now, part of the challenge, as I said earlier, which is a reason why many organizations have not yet modernized their application portfolio, is the complexity. And just to illustrate this, I've taken a screenshot of the latest cloud native landscape. So this is publicly available on cncf.io, which is CNCF stands for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Sorry. And as we can see here, the ecosystem of vendor or solutions available in any single aspect of a cloud native application is massive. So if you think about different development teams working towards deploying an application and being used to consume separate components that are available part of that landscape, without having any form of consistency, you can imagine the challenges associating to turning this into IT operations later on. And clearly, there is a need probably for standards to emerge on that front, because it is causing some challenges from an IT operations perspective, certainly. Now, containers are the future, which means that you can expect to see more containers running in your data center. This is for sure. And to just quote Stéphane Massalt, who's the VP of Cloud Labs at Swisscom, who was touching on the point I've just made now. The big stones we have to overcome are day two operations when it comes to containers. It's not a big deal to deploy Kubernetes cluster. The trouble starts when you want to start updating, upgrading, adding nodes, and all that kind of stuff, which means really the day two operations aspect of managing a Kubernetes environment. Now, which can be translated into, if you look at the challenge too, so how do we move toward modern application with greater velocity? Because, you know, when you want to innovate, you better want to innovate first, as opposed to being the last to innovate. And of course, on the other hand, and that's the first goal is more related to the business and the developer community, while the second one is more related to IT, and the pressure on IT is how do we operate modern infrastructure with more stability at scale. And again, this is an area where we have invested significantly. And if some of you have seen the latest announcements that VMware made in March, April this year, with the release of the new version of vSphere, our hypervisor, what we announced there is the support for Kubernetes natively at the hypervisor level. Right, so why is this a big deal? Is because you know, what we've seen is that many customers who had to deal with containers, and all of us will deal with containers at some point if we're not already, is that they were forced somehow to have another silo of infrastructure for their modern applications, which is never good, right? So anything that adds a new silo is contributing to adding complexity. And so what we're bringing here with the support of Kubernetes at the hypervisor level is the ability to now run both containers and virtual machine on the same platform. And that is helping IT operators. And the reason for this is easy to understand. You get the same governance now from IT. IT can allocate resources, a namespace for the containers that they make available to the developer community. They can enable the same security policies on the containers with the same tool that they would use for the other workloads that run in the data center. So using the same operating model for containers while staying in control of what the developers community can actually do. On the other hand, the developer community now who's used to interact with Kubernetes, which means through API, with the kubectl interface, can natively interact with that platform and request for Kubernetes pods or container pods to be created. So they can tap into the resources that IT have made available to them, the same way they would do it pretty much when they go into a public cloud and start firing off containers as they need to develop new application. And this will all contribute as well to, of course, moving faster application from development to production and streamlining the processes. Right. So this is a clear innovation that we added with vSphere. This is available part of VMware Cloud Foundation. So the way for customer to consume and take advantage of this features is through VMware Cloud Foundation as well. So why is this interesting, right? So if you think about Cloud Foundation, as we discussed and earlier on the Cloud Foundation and its benefits, now you have the same foundation, as I said, for running both virtual machines and the new applications. So no need for additional silos anymore, consistent operations for both virtual machines, traditional workloads, and the new workloads. So some of you may say, well, I don't have developers, so maybe that's not a problem for me. But as I mentioned earlier, reality is that it is likely to become a problem tomorrow if it's not there already. And the main reason for this is that third-party vendors and ISVs are themselves going to deploy applications, and some of them have done it already using the same techniques. So the way you will consume the new application are going to be based on the same infrastructure as well. Now, if you do have developers, again, I think you understood the benefits now, is having this consistency is going to make the life of IT easier while satisfying the needs of the developers community so that they can move faster the application into production. So going back to the question we asked a few slides ago, the challenges are how we address developers' velocity while maintaining infrastructure stability. We position VMware Cloud Foundation in the concept of hybrid cloud. So now it's quite easy to connect the dots and realize that with that level of consistency that VMware Cloud Foundation brings, and the fact that we now better support the needs of the developers community, organization will have the opportunity to either deploy those new applications on-premise with the Kubernetes constructs that are available natively within vSphere, or in any of the cloud providers that we've partnered with that makes the same software stack available, right? So that consistency that we bring across clouds applies not only to virtual machines, but also applies to containers, meeting the demand that any organization will face either now or very soon. So just to recap on what we deliver on, we deliver a developer-ready infrastructure that brings in automation for the Kubernetes platform and APIs for the developers so that they can consume resources the way they do it today already. We provide a universal platform that supports both virtual machines and containers, so traditional applications and modern applications. We help reduce the cost, and there are many studies here that are available to support that statement, compared to by 28% compared to 3-tier architecture. We do have tools, and I will touch on this later as well, that really allow to build a business case around the use of our software-defined data center solution with VMware Cloud Foundation based on your own data. So we can actually capture resources utilization in your own environment and build a business case that is really tailored for your own environment. And then it's obviously a foundation for hybrid, which means extending the same capabilities not only on-premise, but among the top 6 cloud providers out there and the 4,000 plus VMware cloud providers, which are more regional service providers in many cases, where the same stack is available. So bringing that level of consistency on any location, which reflects and goes back to the any cloud message part of our vision. Now, what we've seen is that many customers don't necessarily, go straight to the endpoint. I mean, or the final goal here. Everyone progresses at its own pace. Often customers start with what we call a core HCI, meaning simplifying their infrastructure by not only virtualizing compute, which is broadly done already, but also virtualizing storage, which means removing a lot of complexity that customers are dealing with in the data center. So virtualizing compute and storage on x86 servers, reducing the number of components, which gives them faster time to market to deploy the solution, but also the opportunity to scale out way quicker later on as they need to add more resources in the data center or to migrate and refresh their hardware later on as well, rather than doing a lift and shift, meaning you add just compute nodes in your data center and automatically things will start rebalancing so you can start decommissioning your old kits. So that's a phase one as a good start. And typically customer move to a full HCI stack, which is the complete software-defined data center stack, which includes moving to a cloud operating model. And once those customers are here and they want, of course, they well embarked on the journey to take advantage of public cloud and moving to a hybrid cloud strategy. So those are the three phases that we typically see customers going through. To conclude that presentation, I will have two more slides. First, I guess, going through this presentation, you have an understanding that VMware does provide IT organization a path to the digital transformation by delivering consistent infrastructure and consistent operations across their own data center, but also public clouds, meaning a true hybrid cloud strategy, and accelerating the application speed and agility for business innovation and growth. So meeting the demand of both IT and the developers community who's eager to develop application and turn those application faster into production. So this is why we believe that Cloud Foundation is key to enabling real hybrid cloud solution. And, as an invitation or suggestion, as I mentioned earlier, we have great tools to do assessments, both from a sizing perspective, to look at your existing environment and make some projections on, how the infrastructure would look like. Would you consider moving to a fully software-defined data center? But also associate this to a real business case. So what are the savings you would realize from both a footprint perspective, from a CapEx investment perspective, as well as from an OpEx perspective. So I would invite you, if this is something you're interested in, to work with First Technology, who can then also take advantage of the resources at VMware, if need be, to conduct those assessments. I'd like to thank you very much. I hope you found this presentation informative and valuable, and I certainly enjoyed talking to you, even though I do realize it is more a monologue, talking to a camera, but still I hope it was interesting for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yannick. I think that was very, very informative. We'll break the monologue and chat with you directly. I know it feels a bit strange for most speakers when you in an audience physically. It's very different to just talking to your screen and not getting a pulse because you got nothing to measure on. But either way, it was well delivered. Thank you. I think some interesting takeaways there. First of all, the kudos to VMware for the evolution from what was, I don't know, now probably 20 years ago, 15 plus certainly, from being a virtualization environment to being a platform for hybrid cloud, modern application deployment, etc., which is quite significant actually in terms of the game changer. And I think we've seen over a long period of time how that virtualization environment has evolved to add services around security, i.e. microsegmentation, and then the integration modules. And really, we see VMware as a Lego block to a large extent. And obviously, there was this massive acquisition by Dell a couple of years ago, which acquired part of VMware. You're still a separately listed entity. And we like the fact that you're separately listed entity because you've got autonomy, even though Dell is also one of our big partners. But in saying that, it's given us the ability to help customers navigate into this cloud arena. And the cloud arena has been a challenging step for most people. And we know a couple of years ago, a lot of the big players were saying, yeah, the world's going to be in the public cloud, and that's it. And it's going to be one public cloud. So we had Google fighting out there. We naturally had Amazon, we had Microsoft and everybody. And it wasn't very long ago when one of the top cloud leaders came back to the industry and said that an actual fact, we have to acknowledge the world's going to be hybrid. And that is very true, because it's not a one shoe fit all. I mean, it can't work possibly. And so we as First Tech work very closely with VMware to build that solution architecture in terms of the hardware layer being ready for hybrid cloud or for VCF, etc. And then the VMware components, unlocking that over time, so that as customers mature through their back-end digital transformation, they can unlock the value of their investment and not having to throw it out. And so we're seeing those shifts happening slowly. It's not a rapid change that we're sensing, but it's happening. I mean, the demand is there, the requests are there. And from a First Tech side, I want to touch on that a little bit. What we're seeing is that we're seeing customers shifting slowly, and I think the ambition is to shift faster, but it's not always possible. We as First Tech present solutions from many of the cloud providers as well, but we're seeing a large percentage still saying in a private cloud on-prem. Then there's the private cloud in a hosted environment. Then there's the infrastructure as a service component. Then there's the public cloud components as well, tapping in certain software as a service functionalities like your email and Teams, etc. And then there's the other environments that either from a dev point of view, maybe it's Microsoft, maybe it's Azure or Amazon, and plugging those pieces together as people pull those different services from different areas together to drive their business. And that's always the way it's been, but it's been internal. Now those are being sourced from external. So that's interesting for me, and certainly from a development point of view. From a application perspective, some of the slides looked a little bit technical there. I think anybody that's involved with architecture would understand that. Some people on the call or the webinar may not be technical, but I think the big takeaway there is that the world is changing, and in this hybrid arena, so are the applications. And most organizations need scalability, they need security, and not only do you have to be an organization that develop your own apps so that you can leverage a platform like Kubernetes, etc., but as applications get released by software developers, external parties, third parties, they may read Kubernetes in the future or a containerization to run on for exactly the same reason: security, scalability, flexibility, hybrid cloud architectures, etc. So I think it's a good space to watch. And I love that slide of yours, the cloud native ecosystem. That's a shocker, right? Because you don't know where to look. It's like just little icons everywhere, and it was interesting. And yeah, so I'm good with that. Thank you. We still got Arthur on the call as well, so we're going to come back to Arthur in a minute. I see there's a question there, so let's just go back to the questions quickly and see what the question is. So the question posted here is that the perception in the SSA, or I think it's SA, is that VCF and cloud is expensive. It's an expensive journey for many of our small customers to medium-sized customers. Can you comment on this?
So, I mean, if I want to be very honest, in the early days with VMware Cloud Foundation, we had mainly success with large enterprise customers. This is correct, but we have seen this changing and evolving in the last 12 months, where we had tremendous success in the commercial space as well in Europe. So we have partnered as well with some OEMs to provide some bundle solutions that are more appealing as well. So without getting into details, there was a starting point for VCF, which was a minimum of 8 servers to start with. And that was called the standard architecture, but we have revised this architecture to be able to start with less nodes than this, and 4 nodes typically, right? 4 to 6 nodes. So making it more or less expensive from an infrastructure requirement perspective as well. So we start seeing a lot of traction in the commercial space. I think it's And I'm hopeful that we can rectify that perception of the market in South Africa. Challenges, I think just coming back as well to one of the comments you made earlier, and the adoption of public cloud. I cannot comment on the price point for South Africa specifically, but I think one of the challenge with public cloud has been always that customers had to adapt new and deal with new tools, and each cloud provider has its own set of tools and processes. And moving from one cloud to another is not that easy as well, because you multiply the skill sets that you need in your own organization to operate those different resources that you utilize amongst the different cloud providers. And I think one of the key benefits that we bring here to customers who have already standardized on VMware in their own data center is to remove the need for acquiring new skills to move their workloads and take advantage of the public cloud by making that same platform and the same tool set available to them among the community of cloud providers that are available out there, which I think eventually will also contribute to accelerating the real adoption of hybrid cloud or multi-cloud strategies and in the longer run, by bringing this simplicity. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. I think the confusion and the discussion not obviously, but often is that, cloud is cheaper. Public cloud is cheaper, and we have the conversations daily, and that is not the business case. It's cheaper. The business case is the value it brings to the organization, the access to tools, the rapid deployment, or whatever the case might be. And again, it's picking the right cloud and the services that you need in your business. And that I think the VMware architecture allows that one skill set to operate amongst the different clouds. And I think there's different models for building it. So it's certainly there. So I've got a couple of questions. We're going to create a bit of a panel here. And guys, feel free to keep posting questions if you have. But I've got a question for Arthur. And feel free to contribute as well, Yannick, if you've got insight from the European market, maybe. So Arthur, the one common question for organizations, I mean, as an executive in a business, is we've got all these people working remotely now, and there's people I haven't seen for 4 months. I mean, apart from video, and quite honestly, some people are video shy, and I'm not always sure why. It might be because it's a bad hair day, or just didn't do their hair, or they're still in their pajamas. I don't know which it is. So the question here is that how does a company retain its culture in this current work from home situation where we don't have that natural interaction anymore?
It's a great question for Rose, and not an easy answer either. But I've seen quite a few examples of great techniques and great ideas that companies have come up with. And one of them, for example, is they get together every Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. And this is a company that we work with, so we've joined in some of their sessions, for example. And every Friday they have a theme, and everyone dresses up to that theme. And then people get a kind of a round table opportunity to talk about what was great about their week. And although that's not specific to a particular company's culture, it does reflect the kind of engagement between people. And that engagement actually is one of the best reflections of a company's culture. And that engagement is what's exactly missing at the moment, where most meetings are very specific and to the point. People don't beat about the bush too much when they're having to stare at each other through a camera, but bring in that kind of social element regularly, and that helps to enhance interactions. But every company will have different ways of approaching this as well. And interestingly enough, just last night, Microsoft announced enhancement to the Teams platform that allows for better engagement as well, where you'll have a semblance of more direct interaction with each other on the platform. So, for example, right now, we have all these initials of people who are attending the meeting. Everyone could open up their video. We could see everyone, but we'll only see a small proportion of them on the screen. Teams is bringing a new gallery view that will allow everyone to appear in different kinds of environments. So companies should look at those kinds of galleries and those kinds of tools to create a sense of a more cohesive get-together. Again, that doesn't directly address the company's culture, but it's one of the improvements that's coming in these platforms. So I would say all of these platforms are going to have to embrace enhanced ways of interaction between people. Teams just happens to be the first to be doing it. I think Zoom is going to be forced to follow on once they've solved all their security issues, of course. But all of these remote working platforms and collaborative platforms have to be in a state of constant innovation and rapid innovation at the moment. And this level of involving the user more in company activity is going to be have to be one of those tools or areas. So you could almost call it a interaction as a platform, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting response. I think we've experienced some of those as well, where we allow the teams to kind of socialize on the platform. One of the guests posted the URL for that announcement, the galleries, which is interesting. I think it's coming in August from the article, so that's something to look forward to in terms of better utilization of tech from a social interactive perspective point of view. And I remember the article speaks about body language as well, because it's another thing that a lot of us thrive on as human beings is the subconscious understanding of another party's body language. You don't have to do it consciously, but just the behavior. And on a VC, to a large extent, that is not coming through. You in person, you can kind of see what a person thinks by the body language. On a VC, you can't. And I think that's part of a challenge in our social dynamic and our relationship building with customer, suppliers, and whoever it might be that we need. So I've got a couple of questions, and I've got a few more to you, Arthur, and then I'm going to come back to Yannick as well. And Yannick, again, feel free to jump in at any time. So from a business point of view, and I've got questions from a user point of view as well, but from a business point of view, the big concern for any business owner, business managers, etc., is that, are my people productive? Are they working? And looking at our teams within First Technology, because that's my first-hand experience, and from conversations from our customers, it seems like everybody's working more, not less, more. And I'm still taxed by the statement of Netflix increasing hours. I'm probably watching a little bit more TV than what I used to in the evenings, that is. But it's not a binge opportunity, and it is hardly time for it, actually. So from an employee perspective, how do I know? And I think there's two questions there. How do I know that my employees are productive? I think that's important. Not are they working hard or working enough? Are they productive? And then the second part maybe is the sanity check, is that, are they working too much? Because there's a welfare component there. If somebody continues redlining, they're going to burn out at some point. Then I'm going to have zero productivity. So, just some insight, maybe your experience, your thinking around those two thoughts.
The funny thing is that when you were asking the first question, excuse me, I was thinking, well, there's the flip side to that. And then you mentioned the flip side. So there are really two issues here. The one is, do you want to monitor productivity all the time? And how is that going to enhance not just productivity, but also employee satisfaction? So if employees get the sense that they are being monitored every second and they are being measured for whether they're busy, that is going to result in burnout. So if you want to destroy relations with your staff, then by all means act as a constant policeman over them. And you'll find yourself looking for new staff regularly as a result of that. The reality is exactly what you were saying in your second question. Generally speaking, people are working longer hours than before, partly because they don't have to be in traffic, partly because they're not going to meetings, and partly because with everyone sitting behind their desks, there's a lot more meetings happening because people find it so much easier to suddenly call a meeting. The result is that we might not be working more or being more productive, but we're certainly working more intensively. And this is quite exhausting. So a lot of people talk about Zoom fatigue, for example, and it's a reality because when you're in a meeting where you have to be focused on the screen or on the camera, throughout the meeting, that's far more tiring than when you're sitting around a table and when the attention is off you or you're not talking, you can kind of sit back and relax and pick your nose, perhaps. You can't do that in a video conference. So people who have that concern should actually look at themselves and they should back off a bit. If there is a problem with productivity, by all means, there are tools that can measure productivity and also measure activity and attention. But those tools come with tremendous dangers of creating great employee dissatisfaction and increasing stress on the employee, which, exactly as you say, will be counterproductive. So balance productivity with employee satisfaction, but also employee chill, you could say, in terms of not having to feel too pressurized just in doing their regular job.
Yeah, and if I may add just a few comments on this, I think it's a very interesting topic indeed. I think we all had to adjust, and we all learned, and we all made mistakes as well. And you know, I can speak for my personal experience where when being forced to work from home full time, I remember the early days, because everyone felt we had more time. We had a packed agenda with back-to-back Zoom meetings from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the evening with no break in between, and you end up with waking up in the morning thinking you're going to have to achieve A, B, C, D, E during the day, and we finished the day and we did none of the A, B, C, D, E, and finished the day with another list of things to do for the next day and having no time to prepare for the meetings because we were just jumping from one to the other. So I think we all learned from also prioritizing a bit. Some of the meetings we were invited to that where our presence was not necessarily needed. Allocating, reducing the time of the Zoom sessions, maybe from a default an hour to 50 minutes so that there is time for a bio break. I think productivity, at least the way we look at it at VMware, and we're not an organization that tends to monitor, do micromanagement of those aspects for sure. In my view, productivity has increased. If we look at the number of interaction we can have with customers during a day, removing the travel time, when customers are available, eventually we have more opportunity to spend time with our customers than we did before. And I think that's acknowledged. And it starts with our leadership. You know, for our even CEO to meet in the same day, CIOs or CEOs of other organizations, it was challenging to organize before. It's actually easier to organize today, and it's going to be the new norm. And I think we've all learned from this. I know that VMware moving to a more flexible workplace is definitely part of the plan, and so I think it's something we'll all live with for the long run. Oops, sorry for the background noise. Actually, there's a story around this. If I may just share that story, it's quite funny. I'm sitting in a city called Nice in France, and in Nice every day at midday exactly, they fire a cannon shot. And the reason for that comes from the 1860s, where a Scottish lord who used to live in the city thought that it was a good idea to do that every day at midday to ensure his wife was at home for lunch. And he left the city years later, but somehow the residents decided that they wanted to keep that tradition. You know, I think in the world where we speak about diversity and inclusion and all those things, it's probably something that will be challenged and should be challenged, but it's an interesting story. Yeah.
So Yannick, that's an interesting parallel there, because in the Cape Territory, we've got a hill called Signal Hill. It's actually on the CBD, the back of the Central Business District, and we have a noon gun as well, which means at 12 every day, there's a cannon that goes off. And if you're in the city, you hear the bang, pretty much the same. And then and then in the townships and some other areas, you've got similar activity, but it's normally guns going off for some criminal experience. But anyway, it's an interesting similarity there. So Yannick, I've got a question for you. We spoke about all these users. You know, I mean, I spoke to a FD 2 days ago, and they've got about from the 300 staff, about 250 working remote, and will continue to work remote. So from an IT perspective, from a technology perspective, how can VMware or how can we help our customers for a better user experience from a technology perspective to address those now staffing that's not external?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone through this ourselves. You know, we're an organization of about 30,000 employees, and we all turned remote. Actually, most of the offices are still closed at VMware, and we're not even allowed to come to the office, right? So we had to turn on 30,000 virtual desktop overnight. So we and I trust you as a VMware partner, of course, are aware of this. We have a whole set of solutions around end user computing that enable this scenario of working from home by virtualizing desktops, virtualizing application, and providing all the security around it. So we have all the tools available and solutions available at VMware to provide a virtual desktop infrastructure solution supporting that model at scale, both to be deployed on-premise or being deployed in the cloud as a service as well. Right. So I would, and some customers did face that challenge. The end user computing team has been extremely busy supporting our customers in many industries who were not necessarily prepared. It had some other side effects as well, you know, on VPNs, for instance. All of a sudden, the internet pipes and the connections and the firewalls as well were not necessarily sized to support a fully remote workforce, because usually employees were working within the perimeter of the company, and so things have changed. So we also have solutions helping customers on that front. So I would, if any individual or any organization on this call would require some help, we're more than happy, of course, to partner with you and them and looking towards a solution.
Okay, thank you. I thought I didn't have got any insight there, but I do have a question for you if you want to get to the question.
Sure.
Okay, so from a user perspective, and I'm not talking about tech now, I'm talking about the user experience, their lifestyle, the impact of having their work at home now. Because I mean, before we used to take a notebook home and do a little bit of email, maybe out of work. Now my office is at home. It's an intrusion, but what do you think are the users' expectations?
You know, I go back to an article I wrote 14 years ago in 2006 in the Stock Exchange Handbook. They asked me to give a guide to the virtual office. And at that stage, for many people, that seemed like an absurd idea, but very clearly it was already a thing back then. The difference then and now is that at that stage, it was more about cleaning up your working environment and making it mobile and portable. And at that stage, it was all about the technology that you used. And it was all about trying to reduce cabling and the like. Today, all of that is taken for granted. Today, the real issue is the experience of the person working remotely and interacting with other people. So a lot of people doing it for the first time come into it thinking it's about the first, in other words, tidying up and dealing with the technology side of things. And yes, that is the beginning of it, because you have to set yourself up in that environment. But that is already a kind of early 2000s mode of thinking about the virtual office. Today, it really is about how you interact with other people. To reference your earlier question about company culture and the like, that is a critical element of it. And the person working from home is expecting the company to make life easier for them, not just in terms of what technology they provide. That is a given. That's almost a hygiene factor that you can't do without. Now, they are, even without saying so, they are in effect challenging the organization to make the experience of working collaboratively and working at a distance that much more comfortable, productive, and satisfying. So it's a big challenge to organizations to address that question and treat the technology as the underlying platform and not as the only platform.
Excellent. Thank you. Some nice insight there. We spoke about the natural team collaboration earlier on. I had it as a question as well. You touched on it in terms of the social aspects of it from a cultural point of view, and also allowing the teams, I think, to interact within the normal team environment without management intrusion. You know, whereby if they want to Skinner, gossip, the South African word Skinner, or just chat about anything that doesn't involve management, we should allow them that freedom, and there shouldn't even be a debate that should be available there. So we've seen a lot of shifts. I mean, some major banks made announcements recently around pushing their workforce into a permanent work from home, and I think these kind of issues are going to come up more and more, especially in the large organizations. We've got workforce that extends into thousands. You know, how do you retain that? How do the teams operate effectively without having to allow a management overburden, I think is the right word I'm looking for, and still feel relevant or collaborate relevantly. We close to 12:15. We still got a little bit of time. If there's any questions that anybody want to pose, or if any of the speakers want to raise any topics themselves, feel free to do so. You may have some insight in terms of what we've spoken about so far that may add value to the audience. So while you're thinking about that, I've got another question, and it's to both of you this time. So if we had to step forward, and it's very difficult to visualize the future, I think, Arthur, you've spoken about that earlier. It's so dynamic right now that it's not linear. It's not even exponential. It's just, the hockey curve is radical. So what changes do you see in the, let's use the word near future without a time frame attached to it, that could for people, process, and technology? There we go. What changes do you see for people, process, and technology?
From our side, the big shift is that the digital awakening I spoke of earlier is going to become a standard way of thinking, whereas at the moment everyone sees it as temporary. But in fact, as you said earlier also, this we're not going back to the old way of operating, but it goes beyond just that. It's really about accepting that every aspect of work, education, and socialization is going to be different for years to come, not just for the next few months. People seem to think that it'll be over by September or October, and we can all go on holiday again as usual in December. That's not going to happen, and we have to come to terms with it, and that's part of the digital awakening that I was talking about.
Yeah, on my side,
Yannick, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
100, got you.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say, I think the working from home and the flexibility given to employees to work from home, I don't think it's going to go away fully. I think we'll have to find a good balance between giving that flexibility to people and at the same time, something Arthur touched on, having time to meet physically as well, to maintain a company culture, which is difficult and challenging when the workforce is fully virtual or distributed, in my opinion. So I think what we may see on people, and we start seeing this in France already, people considering to move out of the cities, because they realize that, and in France is a typical example, and maybe it's quite unique, I don't know, where most of the businesses are around Paris area. And you have this big city, Paris, which concentrates 90% of the business and offices. And then you have a big country around it, which is a beautiful country and less people living there. A lot of people commuting between their home city and Paris on a regular basis. This may change, and I think we start seeing people living in Paris now considering to move out of Paris, and probably for a longer period of time. So that can be a direct impact on people. Process and technology. I mean, if we look at IT in particular, everything I've said in a presentation, I strongly believe in it. I think organizations really are going to reassess, rethink their priorities, and looking at investing in solutions that will give them flexibility and agility, because they will need agility to innovate. And the way many organizations are organized today from an IT perspective is way too siloed. So I think this will eventually accelerate the need to move to a more agile IT for many organizations.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you. That was, I think, quite a nice insight, and in terms of the things that we should be looking forward to or influencing perhaps as we move ahead, and not wait for it to hit us on the head and then go, actually, we should have done it. From my side, I don't know, there's no questions, so I want to thank both of you for your time given, for your presentation and the informative discussion. I want to thank the audience again for joining us today and sharing in this discussion experience, and hopefully you've got some takeaways which will allow you to think. From our side, from First Tech side, we've known most of you for many years and will continue to be here. We're stable. We got no issues here from a business perspective as we look after our customers still. And if there's any questions that are arising from these discussions later on, and you wish to pursue those technical discussions in further details, we'd be happy to engage. I think most of you know us by first name as we treasure our relationships and access that you've given us to yourselves as our customers. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe. For anybody on the roads in the Cape Territory, I haven't been out yet since I've arrived this morning in the office. I mean, in the office this morning, rarely, but I am working from the office, and hoping that the storm isn't havoc outside. So everybody be safe, be good. Remember to practice your social distancing, wear your mask. My office door is closed, so I'm not wearing a mask, but it's right here. And be safe. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for
stay safe all.
Okay. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.